handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2 1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4 7 tree 9er 8 9er out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds HEPT. Gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Denise Simon Experience. Very happy that you could come along for the ride. It was a fascinating week in Washington, D.C. That we had to live through, and the fallout continues. And so with that, I want you to join me in welcoming Rachel Bovard with us. Now, Rachel is the Senior Policy Director at the Conservative Partnership Institute, which is a organization that is led by Jim DeMint, and their charter is to, I guess, try and teach some of these people over in Capitol Hill what they're supposed to really be doing. What a Herculean task. So Rachel has been kind enough to join us so we can talk about the stupidness of the omnibus. So Rachel, thanks so much for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, I think that there's a kind of a little bit of a misnotion here, and that is that the budget was already approved. This omnibus just essentially says where the money is to be spent now, correct?
Well, actually, Congress hasn't approved a budget this year. So this bill is just...
Okay, maybe I shouldn't have said budget, but yeah.
So this bill is just... is 12 appropriations bills wrapped into one, and it's hence why it's $1.3 trillion of spending, and it's spending across the government for the rest of the fiscal year.
Which really only takes us to the end of September, correct?
Right. So we'll be back here to deal with this later.
Rachel, why does the president not have a line item veto?
So that has been ruled, I think, unconstitutional in some cases by the courts, and I think the president's been loath to use it because people will just immediately challenge it. You know, you've seen these courts on every single one of Trump's priorities try to challenge them and try to take them down. So I think, you know, he just doesn't want to go through the effort because it will take months, sometimes years, to see an outcome that might not be in his favor. You've seen the president this morning threaten to veto this bill.
Yes.
Because, as he said, it doesn't include that, you know, DACA deal in which, you know, you get legal status for DACA recipients, but then you also get spending on a border wall, which the president really wants. So unclear where we're headed for the rest of the day. It should be pretty exciting.
When it comes to spending across government like this, and what should be in there and shouldn't be in there, I have not still to this day completed the 2,232 pages, but there are some fascinating things in there that clearly should not be. I mean, not to the point where the government shouldn't be spending money on that kind of stuff at all. And so if line item veto is out of the realm of options, then can a sitting president use, I almost hate to go here, but can they use an executive order to essentially suspend some of these, I wouldn't say laws, because an act is a law, but some of these things, these acts like this Food for Safety Act or Food for Progress Act was just kind of stupid. Or can he say, we'll let the law stand, but we're going to suspend those funds until such time we put a committee on and re-examine where we need to be with this law? I mean, I'd like to see this thing get from something below $1 trillion if possible. least we'd be going in the right direction.
Yeah, unfortunately, just due to the balance of powers, the president's pretty restricted in controlling where money goes. That is pretty affirmatively lodged into the hands of Congress. So when Congress says you have to spend money on this, the president's hands are tied to some extent. He has to follow the law and say, okay, I will spend money on this. Where he does have some flexibility is in the law, where Congress delegates some authority to the agencies to figure out how to implement some of this. That's where the executive branch does have good authority to decide how the law will be implemented. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see the president's agencies, the executive agencies, Department of Education, Department of Labor, Environmental Protection Agency, take a little bit of license with the authority Congress has given them on implementation. But on the funding side, that is all Congress's authority, and it's Congress that's really making the decision to spend this much money and determining where it will be spent.
Yeah, I mean, they clearly have power of the purse, and as long as something is standing law, I guess in some form or fashion it has to be funded. And so the challenge then is, do we create some kind of committee that looks at some of these things that are in there and go, wait, we're, is this really a law, or is this some kind of regulation? And to re-examine some of these things so we can eliminate 90 million here or 114 million there?
Yeah, Congress actually had a committee like this back in 2010, 2011. It was the Super Committee. You may remember it. It was when conservatives passed the Budget Control Act. Part of that was, we have to create this Super Committee designed to do exactly what you just said, which is to find waste throughout the government and cut X amount of spending. And if they weren't able to do that, then the sequester would go into effect. Automatic spending cuts would go into effect. And you may remember Paul Ryan and Patty Murray, the senator from Washington and the current speaker, they were in charge of that, and they were unable to get, to find places to cut spending. I'm sure there were places. I just don't think they could get consensus to make those cuts. And as a result, the sequester went into effect, which is across the board spending cuts. Now, Congress has just in the last spending bill undone those spending caps. So the Republican majority really just undid any control on spending to the tune of what they passed in 2011 under President Obama. So it's, for a fiscal conservative, it's a dark time in Washington, because it doesn't really seem like anyone in the Congress is really committed to the kind of spending cuts and spending reduction and spending responsibility that you're talking about.
Well, and so the distinction is kind of there's no will on either side of the aisle. I mean, the Republicans / conservatives are all fine with financially supporting the Pentagon and the military needs, and rightly so, as long as the Democrats will go along with it, as long as they can get their domestic spending.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you've seen some Republicans come out. Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky has come out very strongly against the major spending, particularly in this bill. But on the whole, you haven't really seen a lot of members on the House or the Senate really come out and take a big stand against this for its massive bloated price tag.
So the members of the Freedom Caucus, what do we have there? Like 24 of them?
There's about 30 now, yeah.
So they look to be the most aggressive in those that voted no. And why isn't, I don't really like committees inside of the House. I mean, we got this committee and that committee and, this caucus and that caucus is kind of nuts. But nonetheless, if the GOP and if the Republicans and the conservatives were all doing the right thing, the Freedom Caucus would be all of them, right?
Yeah, the Freedom Caucus has done a significant job in mounting an opposition. They almost were able to take down the first procedural step that the bill had to take in the House yesterday. There just aren't enough of them, but the ones that are there are fighting, but they need more numbers. They need more people who care as strongly as they do about fiscal conservatism. And unfortunately, that just wasn't the case. But they came close. They did mount a good opposition yesterday that came close to blocking the first step this bill had to take. They just need more numbers, which is, I don't know if they're going to get any in the midterm cycles, but it would be nice if they did.
Well, it's certainly a catch-22, Rachel, because, I mean, if you've got a congressperson that's representing their district may not be as conservative in District 7 over here as it is in this state in District 14. So I clearly understand that they're supposed to be representing their constituents and that there's a different, financial culture, district by district, state by state. But I think there also needs to be a compelling argument where some of these, that need to, get kind of in line here that go back to their districts and say, this is what I want to do, ladies and gentlemen. I want to vote no on this, and these are the reasons why. Do I have your permission, kind of thing? I mean, can you imagine that kind of a remarkable question?
No, but I think what you're getting at is the root of representative democracy. I mean, that is the conversation that members should be having with their constituents. But, instead you kind of see these members making decisions based on interests that may not have anything to do with their districts. So, I do think, there needs to be more of a national conversation about whether or not these bills are okay, right? And whether or not we should be passing $1.3 trillion bills without any amendments, without any debate, without any process. I mean, remember, this bill, like you said, is over 2,000 pages. Members were given less than 24 hours in the House to read and understand what was going on. So many of them, I imagine, voted without even having read the bill. And that is not a position that they should have to be in. The House leadership broke their promise to give members 72 hours to read bills before they pass them. And that's just unacceptable. It should be unacceptable to the members, and it should be unacceptable to the grassroots, to the constituents. And so that's something I think there needs to be more of a conversation about, not less.
When you look at the text of the bills, I got to, I don't know, about 600 pages and still feel like I need to keep going. Just, it needs to be a real lesson in government machinations to touch every page. You can't read every word, but you can kind of skim every page. The text looks like it is brought along from the year before and the year before and the year before. You know what I'm saying? It just kind of gets repeated and nobody's really challenging, the Department of Education is going to go spend money on blah, 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 blah. And this money is to be used, and not to exceed. And once it's gone for that year. I mean, that text keeps repeating and repeating. So to concoct a 2,200 page omnibus bill doesn't look like it would be something to take that long. You just go back over to this computer and you just draw up the text from the previous time, right?
Yeah, that is largely, I think, what they did. Where you start to see some policy changes is in what's called the general provisions section that is at the end of each title. And so if you want to speed up your reading process, just skip right to that section. And that's where they start to insert policy. And that's where it says no funds can be used for, this or that, or we're going to spend 10% of the funds on this cause. And so that's where you start to see the policy changes. And you also saw a lot of actual bills that got folded into this omnibus. So at the end of the omnibus, you saw that's where the gun control bill was put in. John Cornyn's Fix Nix bill, that was where that was added. You saw the text of the Cloud Act, which is Senator Hatch bill, which involves data sharing on U.S. citizens between foreign governments and the U.S.
I want you to elaborate on that one because I caught that too, and it just blew my head off.
Yeah, so there's currently regulations in place that allow certain data sharing between the U.S. and foreign governments on citizens, that are involved in illegal practices. And there is an argument to be made that those current data sharing provisions are clunky and need to be updated. But I think from a process standpoint, you never want to add legislation like that to a massive bill where it's not subject to debate, it's not subject to amendments. I mean, this is a privacy issue that we're talking about, and it should be fully debated and fully considered, not thrown into the text of a 2,000-page bill.
Yeah.
Right. Hoping no one sees it and hoping no one understands what's going on. That is the exact opposite way of how we should be handling bills, especially when they relate to the privacy and the data of U.S. citizens.
I guess that's from a standpoint, not to, kind of support it in any way, but when you have got, essentially a borderless world where people can travel and they're commiserating, colluding, and conspiring with other international citizens, and then it kind of goes into the law enforcement realm, somebody needs constant permission to be able to share that data, correct?
Right, and there is an argument to be made that should, you should ease that process, especially when you're trying to track, terrorist suspects across the internet. But that doesn't change the fact that the privacy of all U.S. citizens should not be compromised in that effort, and certainly
Sure.
Congress should not take it upon itself to unilaterally decide to implement these things. I mean, we don't have a tyrannical Congress. We don't elect people to just, make legislative decisions
We don't.
without transparency. I mean, I'm talking from a normative perspective here, but I mean, we need to uphold this standard, and when it's violated, we need to be able to call it out. This cannot. It's not a good trend that this is now becoming a trend, right? This is becoming the way that Congress does business. 6 or 7 bills are thrown into a huge spending package that already contains 12 spending bills. This is not transparent. This is not representative. This is the exact opposite of what Congress should be doing. And people need to understand that and start to raise their voices about it.
Rachel, there's an awful lot of weird international spending in this thing that it looks like it just didn't raise an eyebrow really with anybody. Maybe Senator Paul, but that was really about it. Does something like that come from the United Nations, come from the State Department, come from what? I mean, how is it that we're, doing, food education in third world countries and donating this, or we're building, border security facilities in the Middle East?
Well, this bill does fund every area of the government because it's all in one bill. So we were funding, State Department efforts. We were funding agriculture efforts overseas, like you said. But it's all laid bare in this bill. The U.S. does spend a significant amount of money overseas. You saw Senator Paul last night make reference to the fact that there's no border security for the U.S. in this bill, but there's border security for Tunisia in this bill. So, that's something that, again, if members had time to read and consider this bill, they would have, I feel like a lot more of them would have noticed, but instead it was jammed down their throats less than 24 hours after it was posted. So, a lot of members didn't get that chance to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, members who otherwise would have called these provisions out and really cared about them.
So then, these agencies, what do? They have like a Christmas list and they go, this is what we want, this is how much we think it's going to cost, and this is what it's going to be for. And then they submit it to what? The General Accounting Office or someplace, and then they go, okay, we'll put some text around that, and it ends up in 2,200 pages. I mean, I cannot believe that some of these secretaries of some of these agencies would even allow some of that text, or just bypasses them altogether because they got a staff that does this.
Well, to be honest, the executive agencies don't have a ton of consultation on the drafting of these bills. It's certainly they're allowed to submit their priorities, but it's the Appropriations Committee in the Congress that does the drafting. And they make the final decisions, right, on where and how this money goes. And if the members of Congress don't agree with what the executive agencies want to do, then their priorities simply aren't funded. And in a normal world, you'd consider these bills one at a time, and so you'd have the opportunity for just to consider a bill that funds the State Department and foreign activities, and you'd have members come to the floor, offer amendments, strip out provisions, add others. That is a normal process, but we're not seeing that. We're just simply not seeing that in the Congress anymore. Instead, we're seeing all 12 appropriations bills jammed into one with no debate and no amendments. And members being forced to vote for it upon threat of shutting down the government. And so you're restricting in any of that transparency and any of the debate that could happen on some of these provisions that you're talking about.
Yet any one of these could necessarily get on the chamber floor and stop something like this because they're bringing up some objection, but they didn't. I mean, we kind of waited for a Ted Cruz, or we waited for a Senator Paul to do that, and kind of didn't happen.
That's right. I mean, the Senate passed the bill late last night in an expedited fashion, which required all members to consent to that. So any member could have held that up. Mm-hmm. However, I mean, you saw what happened to Senator Paul last time he tried to do this. The Senate, the last time we were on the brink of a shutdown, I think about a month ago, Senator Paul said, no, I'm not ready to vote. I want an amendment, and I haven't read the bill. So he withheld his consent, and in response, I mean, he was just excoriated by his colleagues. Members called him stupid. Members called him, immature and juvenile. So we've created a situation in the Congress where it is if a member decides to stand up and say, no, I want more time, they are going to get publicly shamed for it by their colleagues. And it's just not a good situation to be in, right? You want people to feel good about using their rights as senators, but the leadership has created the scenario where they're scared to.
Oy. So, Rachel, what can be done now? Does the House no, it wouldn't necessarily be in their favor, but maybe some of those in the Freedom Caucus introduce a piece of legislation that says, what we call it, regular order, or whatever that is anymore. Or do we take this omnibus and scrutinize it and then kind of go back and say, we want introduce a piece of legislation that repeals this law, and we're not going to fund this $90 million on this, or $200 million on that?
Yeah,
I mean, there's got to be some fixes. I'm kind of a desperate woman here, looking for some some fixes here.
Yeah, I think any member, has the right to introduce a bill like the one that you're saying. Whether or not they can get it considered on the floor is a different matter, since, particularly in the House, where the Speaker really controls access to the floor. In the Senate, it's a little bit more liberal in terms of, senators having more authority. But I would say, I think members need to express their frustration with this process and tell their leadership in no uncertain terms that they will not stand for this again. I think these things keep happening because the members allow them to happen. They don't raise a fuss. They don't say, hey, I need time to read this bill. They don't, actively express their opposition to their leadership. And so I think, members need to get frustrated with this process and express it. Otherwise, it's just going to keep happening.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, if you're looking at something over $1 trillion and 2,200 pages in order to have debate, in order to do this, I mean, that would be a 3-year process into itself, where these members would have to be, in working 24 hours a day in order to, have those discussions. It's the whole thing is unworkable. So I almost think that you have to kind of dissect it after it happens and kind of go back and unwind some of the stupidness in it. I really think this is a true lesson that, all the listeners here on the Denise Simon Experience need to, go look at this thing online and skim every single page, because it's truly an outrage. And then when you go back and listen to what some of these representatives in the House and even in the Senate have said, you can understand their words a little bit better. Right now, we just hear the same thing. We want it's a normal order, and there's no debate, and 2,200 pages, nobody read it, and we hear all that, but we're not hearing any solutions or any fixes to it, right?
That's right. So I really think that members need to express their frustration with the process, express that this is not how the Congress should do business, because until, the leadership gets that message, they're not going to change how they do this. So people really need to start raising their voices.
And so then that really tells us that based on this particular damage, that Speaker Ryan may be short for the job. We kind of hear some of those we'll hear some of those rumblings anyway.
Yeah, that's up to the members. But, I think a lot of them were frustrated with how this went, and Paul Ryan has to deal with the fact that he broke his promise to allow members to have 72 hours to read any bill before they voted on it. It's a blatant violation of that promise that he made to his membership.
And then McConnell didn't do too much either on his side either, did he?
No, I mean, he made it very clear that, amendments were not welcome. He filled the amendment tree to block anyone from offering amendments. And then he, made it very clear that it was his intent to move this bill forward by the end of the day yesterday. A lot of members were leaving for their junkets this morning, and he didn't want to hold them up.
Ladies and gentlemen, please travel on over to Conservative Partnership Institute. They're doing some... As a new organization, they're doing some pretty good work to, and certainly like sharing time here on the Denise Simon Experience to tell us how things are really happening and how convoluted it is. And Rachel, very grateful for your time and hope that you'll come back and keep us educated. I'm going to keep tapping you on the shoulder because I can't think of another outrage that's worse than this one. When it comes to spending, I keep thinking of consent to the governed, and if these people didn't read it, then they couldn't go back in their districts and ask for our consent. Something very basic and normal. And I don't know. Just a sad day in American government. But thank you.
It was my pleasure. I'm happy to do it.
All right.
Even though it's a sad topic.
I understand. All right, ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. More coming your way.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you this 24/7 stream of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. We are a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. If you're able, please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. Your donation will go a long way in helping us continue to share the American voice. Thank you.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Hi, this is Captain Matt Bruce from the Captain's America Third Watch, and you're listening to Talk America Radio, the new dominant force in conservative talk radio.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia.
And Don Newen from Cowboy Logic Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't go to sleep every night completely fatigued from trying to restore America from the destruction that is taking place,
then you're simply not doing enough. Join us every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, for Cowboy Logic Radio.
let the restoration begin.
Donald Trump came to Washington vowing to drain the swamp and make government work for the American people. But the swamp creatures in D.C. aren't going down without a fight, and the deep state is determined to overturn the election and keep their gravy train rolling. In these turbulent times, it's critical for patriots to stay engaged and be prepared to defend this president. You can stay up to date on Trump's battle to make America great again by listening to America First Radio with Jim Dawes each weeknight at 10 p.m. Eastern on the Liberty Feed.
Hi, it's Mark Walters from Armed American Radio. You know, for nearly a decade, I've been educating, informing, and entertaining responsibly armed Americans. And during that time together, we've shared some ups and downs, haven't we? Trump's election saved our Supreme Court and no doubt the future of our gun rights for now. But now is not the time to lay down. The enemies of freedom are well-funded and more determined than ever. To keep up with the state of your gun rights, make sure to tune in to Armed American Radio right here on Talk America Radio, the new dominant voice in conservative talk radio.
This is Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience. When I'm not debating with Donna Fiducia about politics, I listen to Cowboy Logic Radio. Why, you ask? Because outside of my blog, founderscode.com, and my own radio show, the Denise Simon Experience, Cowboy Logic is by far the most entertaining and informative radio show on planet Earth. Plus, Don makes me feel guilty if I don't listen to his radio show every week.
You cannot retreat to your safe spaces. There are no therapy poodles allowed, especially when facing the truth. And that's just how we like it. Straight, hard, conservatarian talk, on the rocks, no chaser. Served up on the Adrian Slade Show. Small, limited government, constitutional conversations, exclusively on Talk America Radio. Every Saturday morning, 9 a.m. on Talk America Radio Liberty.
You're listening to your local news source, WLBB, News Talk 1330 and FM 106.3.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia, and WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. It doesn't end there. And so I tapped Tom Kelly on the shoulder, the CEO and president of ID Experts, a previous guest, and he's been kind enough to come on, and we're going to talk about this Facebook thingy. So, welcome, Tom, and thanks for coming back.
Thanks, Denise. Always good to be here.
You know, this thing with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica actually happened in 2015, for where Facebook was doing whatever they were doing in this relationship with Cambridge Analytica. But what Facebook has been doing goes back every bit of 10 years, doesn't it, Tom?
Absolutely. It's the core of the business model. Your listeners and all of us need to understand that when we go to Facebook and we provide them all this great information and we do it with at no charge and we create our pages, there's an underlying business model there. And the underlying business model is to utilize our presence, our information, the activity that we generate there in order to communicate with us, to sell us ads, to provide products in front of us. And that is the underlying basis for how Facebook makes its money. And so the question is not so much, we have to differentiate between this Facebook breach and the Equifax breach. They're completely different. Equifax, somebody broke in, got past security walls to access personal identifiable information, PII, information like your social security number, things that people can identify you with. The Facebook is, we voluntarily went and provided Facebook with all this information to enhance our lives, but there's been a lack of transparency from Facebook that said, by the way, for all this information that you are in fact adding, we are going to utilize it to sell you products, to do all kinds of, to involve our application developer community, to allow other people to mine that information for their particular purpose, whether it's to sell you things or to influence your thinking or to market to you on political areas. It's all those different things. And that is, to me, the great, the lack of transparency at Facebook. And this has been going on for a long time. Cambridge Analytica is just the one that is the most recent and the most talked about example.
Just for fun, I'm going to throw in Google, because Google captures every keystroke as well. So we've got Facebook capturing virtually every keystroke, including, I might add, all of the photos, all of the information, the texting that goes back and forth in private messages. And in the background, we don't know even what the collaboration is between Google and Facebook. So I would say that whatever breach of trust that Facebook is guilty of, and they clearly are, we help them along, correct?
There's no question about it. And it goes beyond. So you can look at Google, you can look at Facebook. Heck, our mobile devices, the mobile devices that we carry around, that we have location trackers on, Find My Phone, GPS, that is all gathering a complete profile on where you physically move. And so, I can go through one after another. The benefits that accrue to whether the social media platform, the incredible access to information that a Google platform gives us, and we have to recognize that these are enormous benefits, and that's why these companies have been so successful. They provide something that the market clearly wants, but it comes with an understanding that information is being utilized for a business model and being utilized to either target ads. Go onto Google or go onto any search platform and search for a particular subject, and then look at the kinds of targeted advertising that you get on your landing pages. This is, this does not come as a surprise to anybody in the business. So, this is yet one more example and one more reminder that we have to be very alert to the kinds of information we choose to share and understand what could happen with it once we share it.
And Tom, we think we can turn off some of these apps, or let me say this: we can opt out of some of the stuff that the apps do. In other words, don't track my location, don't do this and don't do that. But that doesn't mean that you have made yourself invisible either. I mean, it's helped, but you're still very, very visible to Facebook and Cambridge Analytica or anybody, and Google or anybody else. Now, Cambridge Analytica is getting the lion's share of this press, but Cambridge Analytica is not the only customer that Facebook has been selling data to, correct?
No, in fact, and let's make it very clear that Cambridge Analytica, it came into got a lot of attention because they did it on behalf of the Trump campaign, and what they were doing was certainly not illegal. In fact, it was going in and mining the quote social network that is inside of Facebook to identify targets of how they would communicate, how they would send their political messages, their ads, gather all the different methods, which their objective was to elect a president. Now, that is no different than the work that the Obama team did when Obama ran for president in 2012. And in fact, everybody talked about what a terrific, how advanced they were, that they were giving them accolades on their use of social media in getting Barack Obama elected, which was true. The difference is that now those who are raising the questions don't really care for this president, while they were very happy, that the other organization used it. But they're, for all intents and purposes, exactly the same.
And then even in Hillary's camp, she did the same thing. But then in her Brooklyn office, Google Alphabet set up a social media operation virtually in the same building as her campaign office. So the point being that we're being sold over and over again. But Tom, Facebook has the ability to create these groups within a group, if you will. So, I mean, you can, support Israel, or you're an environmentalist, or, you're, all these other kinds of things. And then you can, people can join those groups, or you can ask to be a member of that group, and then you got a moderator that'll kind of look at you and go, okay. And so then if one person's in that group, automatically all the others in that friend hemisphere or that friend orbit get included into something that Cambridge Analytica would buy, correct?
Absolutely. Well, think of it this way. You and I connect. Once I go onto Facebook and I set up my profile and I add information, I tell the world what's going on in my life. I'm taking pictures here. I'm going there. I'm posting this information. I'm making this comments. And then you and I become friends on Facebook. And therefore, then now you're part of the network. If somebody comes in and mines and starts looking at me, they say, well, Tom knows Denise, and Denise does these things. And then you're, of course, connected to people, Denise, and that you're going to be connected to. So not only by connecting to me, they can mine me, they can go into you and find you. And it's just the continuing expanding network of these relationships, and that's true whether it's a personal relationship or if it's a political, and that's both the beauty of the platform, because it does allow people to connect, as well as highlights the kind of connectivity and information that we're placing out there. And I think the great requirement on Facebook is a greater transparency on what can be used with the information that you provide and put into the platform. That's what
Tom,
I believe.
Do we actually have a full handle on what Cambridge Analytica bought from Facebook, or what Facebook sold to Cambridge Analytica? I mean, we keep hearing 50 million. Well, it's 50 million what? Because
I don't know. It'll be pieces of data. It's easy to speculate, but I don't like speculating.
I don't either.
What I can tell you is that social network that I just described, whether it's an individual network or whether it's, as you described, an affiliation with somebody that shares the same political philosophy, the same cultural instincts, a school program, something, it could be any kind of way that we bond together and find common ground. All those networks are available to be mined by these various platforms and analytical tools to determine the commonality of interest, what we're likely to respond to, things that concern us. I think in the political world they call it shared interest. Who has these shared interests that my candidate can connect with? And those are not necessarily, nothing about that is per se terrible. It's just a reality that if we put that information out, we shouldn't be surprised that that information is going to be used.
Abused. Yeah. And the same thing necessarily then goes with a YouTube or any articles that get posted up there with the links and then the thumbs up or the thumbs down, or
Absolutely.
you got the frowny face. So all of those things are being scored too, so then they can get a pulse, because now we have a trending thing that's going on in Facebook, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And and it's also, there's also the equivalent. I mean, there are marketing platforms that try to in fact go in and advise brands and products that these are the influencers on these social media platforms, that when I give a thumbs up on a particular product or an endorsement of that product, that I've got all kinds of people who follow me in these regards, and there are that I'm an influencer. And so there's a lot of this stuff that is getting incredibly sophisticated. And so from an identity protection standpoint, a security standpoint, this is yet another reminder for your audience that be alert to what you put out there. Take care of good housekeeping in terms of passwords, what you click on, where you go. All that stuff creates cookies in your system, which allows people to market to you and come back. And then also pay attention to looking after your identity, making sure that the core things that you're most worried about, your financial, your legal, and all these, that you're keeping an eye on that. And that's where the identity protection plans come in. But the behavior, Facebook, Google, all the others, that's really a question of your behavior and how you want to share your information.
And so we might need to be asking some of the same questions of Snapchat and Instagram and
Sure.
Twitter, correct?
Same thing. Maybe not with with less reach, or I say not necessarily reach, but with less content. Clearly
Correct.
Twitter
Correct.
doesn't have the content that a Facebook could have.
Now, we hear that Zuckerberg's going to go before Congress. Now, what should Congress be asking Zuckerberg? And based on his answers, where do you think Congress is leaning on what they want to, as far as regulations? I mean, Congress likes to make laws. They don't like to repeal them so much, but they do like to make them. And so, are they first going to say to Zuckerberg, you better come clean here and change your policies, or just as a safeguard, you can say you're going to do this, but we're going to force you to do this?
Well, I guess it could be any and all those things, of course, when you're going for. But I think that one line of dialogue is very likely going to be, how much transparency? How do you inform your customers of what could happen to their data? How often do you inform them? How persistent are you informing them and giving them the chance to understand exactly what they're putting into? There are those voices out there now that are raising questions as to whether or not there is a reason that certain social media platforms should be regulated like a utility because of its nature. I'm leaving that to the hands of Congress. My instincts have historically been more inclined to less laws and less regulations are generally better. Mm-hmm. But certainly there are certain things that probably, require communication and make sure there's what I call the adequate, adequate postings of notices of what could happen to the data that you provide. We know that we don't want people using our Social Security number. We know we don't want them using our driver's license numbers, our medical ID numbers, all those kinds of things, because they can harm us. But we also should be aware, and maybe there needs to be a greater effort on some of these social platforms of communicating what could happen with the data that you freely choose to give us.
Woo! This has got a whole lot of ramps going all kinds of places here, doesn't it, Tom?
Yep, and it's got a long lifespan. I think there's a likelihood that you and I will have an opportunity to have another conversation about this.
No doubt. No doubt. Should there be a social media commission? Like a self-regulating. We know that from time to time, Google and Facebook and Twitter and perhaps the other ones, they do talk to each other, including LinkedIn and whatnot. They do have to collaborate, if for no other reason, like the FBI kind of brings them together because they've got some questions and they're on an investigation. But I would rather industry almost self-regulate instead of Congress regulate. Do you think that there is a need for, a private industry self-regulation here, that they issue some standards and then they all necessarily need to adhere, and if they don't, then one can call the other out?
I think self-regulation is always the best, clearly. Now, and we also have to be careful, as long as that self-regulation does not start becoming a basis by which we're going to regulate the kinds of the types of speech, the kinds of information, the kinds of things that we're going to permit. To me, you enter into a whole different arena there. So there's lots of areas that can be misused here. You can misuse the data, and you can also then go the other direction and say, well, we're going to determine that Tom, your position, your page talks about things I don't like, so we're not going to let you on there, and we are going to let this. I mean, there is a bunch of that. We always have to be very cautious about that. We value our ability to be independent in this country. It's our greatest one of our greatest assets is our ability to express our opinions and do so freely and without fear and retaliation. That is still, unfortunately, that doesn't always occur, but we want to make sure that these platforms also make sure that they are good open places for speech as well.
The telephone companies, if you have a public printed in the phone book telephone number, everything's great. But if you decide to go to an unlisted number, you have to pay for that.
Correct.
I have a sense here that something may be coming from Facebook that says, if you want some of these other layered protections such that we don't sell you then you have to pay for it. Do you think there's a possibility of that?
There's always a possibility of it, and that, of course, brings and opens doors for other platforms and other kinds of competition. So I never have a problem with someone's business model saying, I've decided I'm going to charge for this because either it's because it costs me more, or because I think the market will bear it, because I can do it. I can imagine something like that. But also, when people charge for services, that usually opens the door for others to say, well, we'll do it for not charging, or we'll do it for less. So, I think that's our competitive environment.
If they end up charging, I would think the pressure would be especially harder on them to adhere to those safeguarded protections of the data, such Certainly. That, if they get hacked, you're the ID expert. You're out there telling people this is what you need to do to protect yourself. And here you've got social media out there that's kind of abusing it. So I imagine you're kind of standing there with your hands on your hips, stomping your feet here a little bit, because you've been kind of preaching this for a while, right, Tom?
Now, you got to remember, they didn't really technically get hacked. This was all information.
Correct.
So this is information that has always been, we freely give them. And I think the great question here is, how transparent were the platforms in advising people what they intended to do with that data? We
don't know that they didn't get hacked. We just didn't hear about it.
Exactly.
Hackers. The people that the hacked don't like to talk about the hackees. Right. Tell they had some vulnerabilities. But you've been preaching this for a very long time. That regardless of where you go, on the internet and whatever it is that you do, Tom Kelly says you need to be paying huge attention, because there's all these connectivity things. There are these cookies, there's these databases, and they out there get hacked. You know, we send our stuff over to some hospital or some doctor or some pharmacy, and we hope that they safeguard that information. But we're almost putting our mercy, it's up to mercy here that it's being protected, correct?
Yep, absolutely. So, you can never, everybody has to be alert to their own behavior and how there are others that we have to trust and do trust, but given the fact that we know that these cyber breaches occur, given the fact that we know that there are bad actors out there who want to use our information to do wrong things or to harm us, we need to be able to protect ourselves in the identity protection space. On the social media platforms, we better just be darn alert to that what we put out there leaves a mark on what we say, and also all that information could be utilized to market to us or try to communicate or somehow or another influence how we think about things.
Tom, there was a time that I think LinkedIn was violated in some way, and I don't want to necessarily say hacked, because they could have been, but if Zuckerberg goes before Congress, I would think that Congress has to really call in the rest of them too, to see what how is LinkedIn making money, or what are they selling in order to have that platform? The same
Everybody's
thing.
got a platform,
Yeah.
and it's all based on what and they all have their various business models. I'm going to leave it up to Congress to figure out who they're going to call in there, but we know that Mr. Zuckerberg is going to find his way in front of them, and it'll be and I think this continuing story will be a discussion between what Facebook would choose to do to self-regulate, to communicate, to respond to this, versus those voices on in the legislature. They're going to say, this is what we think you ought to be doing, and maybe backing it up with legislation or regulation.
Well, it's kind of curious, because an awful lot of members of Congress have a Facebook account too.
Sure they do. In fact, I'd wonder how many don't.
They've done Facebook Live events, and so this will be.
And that's because of the great power of these platforms. For when we have this conversation where we're talking about areas that give us anxiety or concern us, or whatever word you want to place on that, whether or not some people don't even some don't care that this is going on, others care greatly. But the fact is, these platforms have grown because they offer a real benefit for people to connect in various ways.
Tell us a little bit before we close about ID Experts.
Well, we're the largest responder of cyber breach services in the country. We respond when people get breached. When I say organizations get breached, government, organization, and enterprises. And we provide the services that include notification call centers all the way up to identity protection services for those. We also have a commercially available, consumer available product that you can find at myidcare.com, MYIDCARE care, myidcare.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Kelly, CEO and president of ID Experts. I can't wait till we talk again, because and see where all this falls out.
Enjoy it.
Thank you.
I'm in cold, rainy Portland today, and you're in sunny, warm Florida.
I am. But thank you, Tom, for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience. Ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way.
The truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 435-921, grid to mark, 7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEVT, gas TOT 53.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
I'm so happy you listeners could stay with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. My guest loves the voices that come with the recording here. But I'd like you to join me in welcoming Joel Harding, who is a distant buddy. You know, those things that you just kind of communicate by text messages and private messages and all those other kinds of things. But Joel's a previous guest, and he was an advisor and consultant on information warfare and cyber operations. He has been in Special Forces Operations Detachment Alpha. I hope I got that right, Joel. And
close. And his website is toinformistoinfluence.com. Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause for Joel Harding. Welcome, Joel. Yay! If I could use this one voice, hi. If I could
hi.
use the phone voice for a second, glad to be here.
I'm happy that you are. And thanks for, we're going to do kind of a double segment here, ladies and gentlemen. So kind of sit back because Russia's in the news. Russia. Maybe I should do a whole montage of all these Russia things. But this is getting to a point where things are about as conflicted around the globe as I have actually seen them in my lifetime. And it's a different paradigm because we have the internet, and the internet adds another layer of stuff that we have to go through. I mean, we have videos, and we have bots, and we have trolls, and we have fake accounts, and we have hacking, and all of these things that go on. And then we have poisonings that seem to happen too. But Joel, you know, I was actually talking to a neighbor. I rarely ever go to personal things, but I was talking to one of my neighbors yesterday, and he said, you know, it used to be that the United States was excellent at carrying a message globally. And that would certainly be to how we were going to defeat communism. And I was reminded that, you know, Kennedy wanted very much to stop the Marxism, communism in a country that was just 90 miles from Florida. Didn't work out too well. But I mean, that was what the United States and allies did, is that we wanted to stabilize some of these countries and not have them go sideways on it. And Joel, I think this whole paradigm of social media and the internet and the connectivity has taken a lot of our savviness or our power and our plots to do these things away from us, and it's made it difficult beyond description. Did I get any of that right?
You're pretty good.
Cool.
And a lot of credit goes to you for interpreting a lot of the stuff that is really complex beyond our collective imagination. And your neighbor was kind of right in that the United States did control the message, but the problem is that the messages were restricted because of technology. We didn't see how the message was really being perceived in Venezuela. We didn't see how the message was being perceived in Russia. We didn't see how the message was being perceived in Germany or Botswana. You know, so we were fed the feedback by whoever chose to give us the message. But that is how successful we are. So we are as much a product of the propaganda as was the rest of the world. And if you look at Russia today, that Russian troll farm, which we're hearing about, the Internet Factory.
Research agency.
Right, an Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, which today is known as GlavNet. Most of their mission was not to throw propaganda at the United States or the UK or Europe. Most of their mission was to throw propaganda at Russian citizens domestically. And the Russians themselves are much more of a product of propaganda. In fact, according to myself and other experts, most of what the Russians believe is absolute false, fabricated, made up, distorted, whatever word you want to use for the disinformation that we are complaining about. We're complaining about the disinformation that came from Russia, and mildly touched on our news, except for that 2-week period just prior to the election. Then we were saturated with it, and we were hyper-saturated in really stinky stuff, But the Russian people live in that environment, and almost everything that they read and see and hear is totally fabricated. Putin's election, we know that the turnout was fairly low, but we know that whatever people turn out, Putin got 95% of the votes.
Yeah.
So, which is also a lie. And
right.
We've heard about massive stuffing of ballot boxes to ensure that he got the vote. We know that a lot of his opposition were prevented from running. We know that a lot of his opposition was prevented from talking to the press. Right. So if you even remotely think it's bad here, I'd hate to be inside of Russia. But it's honestly not as bad as I say it is, because today I was confronted with a Russian saying that I've never heard of before, and it's called "sat on a needle," and I didn't know what it meant. And so I put a thing on Facebook saying, "Could you tell me what this means? You Russians?" And then I sent emails to all my friends in Russia, and I said, "What does this mean?" And I sent them a link to the article. And not only did I get feedback on the saying, and this is the truth, but I also got feedback on the newspaper saying it's a tabloid, like the tabloids that you see in the supermarket checkout line. Mm-hmm. So they feel free enough to comment on to answer the question, but also free enough to criticize the actual publication where it was printed. So they know that they have a certain amount of leeway. They know that they're allowed to criticize some things, but they also know that they're not allowed to criticize some things like Putin. You don't criticize Putin or you lose your job. And so one of the Russian trolls that's most famous that actually worked inside the troll factory, I'm not going to say her name, but she and I have become fairly close friends.
That's the one that's in Washington?
No. She still lives in St. Petersburg.
Oh, all right.
And she is criticizing Putin like you would not believe. Mm. So I'm waiting for the day that all of a sudden she just disappears, because they decided it's enough. So
Joel, let me ask you this. Yeah, I'm watching all of this stuff go on very, very carefully, and you're a lot smarter. I mean, you and I kind of read just a lot of the same things, but you're a lot more layered into it than I am. But I would say I find that even Russian officials don't necessarily trust each other either. I mean, we're in I see in a situation that nobody knows anything to really hang their hat on in Russia, except if you want to survive, you better be in Putin's orbit on the positive side.
Absolutely. The world revolves around Putin as far as they're concerned. But we also know that there are limits to what you can and cannot do inside of Russia, even with Putin's blessing. The formula that Putin worked out somewhere, I'm not sure if it was in 2008 or 2012 when he came back in power again, but he told a whole bunch of people, he said, listen, I know that you're crooked, I know that you're corrupt, and I know that what you're doing is not legal. So I'm not going to stop you, but this is what you're going to do. 50% of your illegal gains goes to me. Mm-hmm. And so they're earning literally billions of dollars, and they have to give Putin half of what they earn. And this is all these oligarchs have signed on to doing the wrong thing. So in effect, it's become not an autocracy, but a kleptocracy where it's official that you're allowed to steal. And there was a really good article I read today about the Russian mafia. And if you read my blog, I've reblogged it because I'm really trying to help people understand the culture which is inside Russia. Now, to get back to what you were saying,
believability. Yeah.
Well, right. A lot of what is being said. Okay. a lot of what is being done by the oligarchs and by the people who are in power is now being exposed. 3 Russian journalists who were female were accosted by a member of the Duma, and that's like congressman here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And he accosted, and starting way back in I think 2004, and somebody was improperly touched as of 2017. So they accused him, and they said, so they went to the right people inside the Duma and said, this is what happened. And the Duma did an investigation, and I think it's been this past week where they came up and said, we investigated, and he's not at fault. Boom. End of subject. It's like, wait a second. So the movement here inside the United States with the hashtag, I forget what it is now.
Me Too.
Yeah, the Me Too. And that was the name of my blog yesterday about that. I expose this. But so now all the journalism, all the journalists in the world and all the newspapers in the world are bringing this up. Oh, and the guy's name is Slutsky. Really, Slutsky. I couldn't invent this stuff. And so this guy is getting summarily, publicly humiliated. And if it were here in the United States, the guy would be resigning right now. He would be gone. But this is Russia, and so they accept a little bit of leeway inside of the Russian politics, and so his career continues to move forward. But nobody can take them at face value. Oh, that's right. Domestic violence, where a man beats on his wife, was just removed as a crime inside of Russia as of I think last year.
Oh.
So that's
Whoops.
no longer a crime. That's no longer a crime in Russia. And there's little things like this that are just going all throughout Russia, and it's being pointed out that it's okay to beat on a journalist. It's okay to kill a journalist. It's okay to steal. It's okay. And corruption is inculcated throughout the Russian society, where if you go from point A to point B and the police stop you, you have to give them some money. So that's corruption in the form of graft, and it's everywhere inside of Russia. When I went there in 2010, I didn't see the graft, but I did see a society that was overwrought by police missteps. And I ran into the KGB a few times, and their message was very clear: do as we say or die. And it's like, okay. And it's neat. Here in the United States, a guy will walk up to the ATM machine, he'll pull it out, and he'll restock it with money. He'll close it off, and then he'll go back inside the bank. Well, in the ATM in Russia, 2 guards with submachine guns are going to stand there and guard the ATM machine while the guy recharges the money. I experienced that at the airport outside of Moscow, and I have never seen that before in my life. So life in Russia is a little bit different than it is here.
You know, Joel, when the United States accused Assad of using chemical weapons and that Russia was complicit in that, Russia denied.
Right.
And then they said, give us the evidence and we'll run our own investigation. And they never do. Right. Then we have a former Russian intelligentsia and his daughter that were poisoned in Salisbury, a suburb of London, and they're accusing Moscow of ordering this, with the poison being Novichok. And of course, Moscow is denying this and says, give us the evidence and let us run the tests. And they always want all that. But you ever notice that they don't run their own individual tests and say, oh, Assad is doing this, or gee, Litvinenko did die of polonium-210. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's kind of like they never do anything independently and say, oh, shame on you, America. Your spy ship was over here off the coast of Vladivostok or something, you know?
Right. There's been 8 people who have been almost certainly assassinated by the Russians, I think since the year 2000. And then there's, I believe it's 14 other people are suspected of being assassinated by the Russian special services. That's what they call the SVR and outside of Russia. That's the KGB equivalent. So it's a real good chance that Skripal and his daughter were assassinated, attempted assassination by the SVR. Real good chance. But Novichok was invented in the Soviet Union, which is now Russia, and Novichok was stockpiled by the Russians during the 90s and the 2000s. So as the British are saying, there's a high probability that it is the Russians. The Russians, of course, have said, share blood samples with us and we'll do our own investigation. They've also said, well, if this lab in the UK is testing for it, that means they must have it. And the U.S., if you're testing for it, you must have it. And they're saying that all these other countries, because you can test for it, you must have that exact poison. So you are probably the ones that did it. And this is a normal thing for Russia, that they will deny, and then they will point fingers at others saying, well, you have the capability of doing it, so you must have done it. They will also, I've started collecting, and I think I have 18 different alternate theories that the Russians have offered. And the NATO chief for strategic communications asked me to start collecting those alternate theories. After MH17 was shot down over Ukraine, Russia, of course, denied, and then they gave alternate theories. And at the time, I counted 11 alternate theories. And Ukraine shut it down with an Su-25. Ukraine shut it down with the Buk. Ukraine shut it down with this. And Ukraine, they were aiming for Putin's airplane. And all these other theories, and it just got mind-numbing. But Russia likes to obfuscate. That means throw a smokescreen over it so that nobody wants to really think about the actual theory. They will make you think about some of the other things that they're going to distract you. Well, that's a word. That's the word I'm looking for, the 6 Ds. You destroy the evidence, you distract somebody. All the other Ds, meaning that you will make somebody get off on a tangent and not think about the actual theory, or you will make them doubt the evidence so much so that Skripal was never assassinated by the Russians. It must have been the British are trying to throw shade on the Russians now. That's a new saying, right? Throw shade? Okay. But anyhow, so what they're really trying to do is they're using all those argumentative techniques, which you can actually pick up a book and look at, but I'm not going to push a single book. But anyhow, they're trying to use all these argumentative techniques, which they teach in Russia, and it's a matter of basic theory that a Russian will go into the FSB or the GRU or the SVR, and they will know how to use these techniques in common discussions, and so they can distract you from the subject at hand very easily. But it's normal. It's a basic techniques are taught, and something that we could easily teach here in the U.S., but we're about as thin as a text message. And even that has been shortened. It's no longer English. It's O'Reilly. It's 4 letters, O-R-L-Y. So we've stopped thinking about things. We've stopped doing things, and the Russians are very good at taking advantage of that. They know our weaknesses. But when you come to Skripal, I think I have it at 18 theories now. And I'm only halfway through, and that's just Sputnik alone. Sputnik, in case you don't know it, is one of the propaganda channels that was spun off of RT. And it's actually stood up in 2014, and in December 2014. So they're brand new, but they're all over Skripal. And I'm only halfway through the list, and that's just Sputnik alone. I haven't gone through RT. I haven't gone through their official news sources yet. And I only took a half hour to figure out all these theories and copy and paste both the names and the links into a single piece. So it's really typical. If you look at what the Russians are doing with Skripal and the denials and the deterrences that they're using, and the little booby traps that they lay around and expect you to step on, this is a good case study for somebody to actually study what the Russians do on a daily basis.
Well, let me throw some sand in the gears here, because the one thing that was really a big deal, and it has completely faded from the headlines, is this acoustic whatever operation in Cuba to Canadian and U.S. diplomats, to the point where there is physical harm that we have had to remove people out of our embassy there. And, you know, the State Department would say, gee, we're going to blame it on Cuba because Cuba has the responsibility of protecting our people when they are in country. But whatever, if it's Cuba or if it's Russia, they're one and the same. And yet there was no punishment for what was going on with this hearing, whatever acoustic type weapon that was happening there. Why did that just kind of come and go?
Well, it's just it's a matter of news coverage and the way to get more people to read what you're sending. It's just that it became the flavor of the week. That's all it is. And as for that acoustic theory, that's probably a pretty good way to say it. Back in the 1990s, I was reading about acoustic warfare and how you can do it. And I forget the name of the theories and I forget the background, but there was a Russian scientist who was, of course, is Russian, who was researching things, and they discovered that between 3 and 20 hertz, not megahertz, but
correct.
Hertz.
I absolutely had a sound person who's an expert at that explain that to me.
Right.
Yes.
Right. The human body will react with your body tries to reject. Right. You'll try to regurgitate. You get dizzy. All kinds of things will occur to you if your body is subjected to vibrations between 3 and 20 hertz. Right. And it's not really that long. It actually takes a few seconds. And I actually had a computer programmer as an intern for me back when I was the director of the IO Institute, and he knows who he is. I said, I want you to design something for me that's going to come across the screen between 3 and 20 hertz, and so that when I look at it, it's going to make you physically ill. And at the time, the screens were vibrating at 60 megahertz per second, and so it absolutely negated what we were trying to do. But since then, it has been perfected, and it's possible to send something through an email as an attachment or as a GIF file, and it will resonate inside the email at 3 to 20 hertz and make you physically ill. So I'm convinced. In natural causes, let's discuss that for a second. If you
make
have
it snappy, we got a minute.
Okay. If you look at metal inside your building that is loose at one end, there's real good and it's fairly long. It may resonate between 3 and 20 hertz. If you have a fan that's in your building that is improperly working, it may resonate inside its housing at 3 to 20 hertz. If you had conduit inside your building, it can resonate at 3 to 20 hertz. So a lot of this physical illness can occur inside the building naturally. So it may not be the Cubans, it may not be the Russians, it may be a natural thing inside the building, and nobody's talked about that yet.
Fascinating. And you would think that the building that we had there for a long time, we always had people in it all this time, but we just didn't have it fully staffed, that this all kind of came to pass. Ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with Joel Harding on all things Russia. We're going to come into a break, but make sure that you stay with us, because on the other side, we're going to talk about this information warfare. And thank you, Joel, for hanging with us, and we'll be right back.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you this 24/7 stream of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. We are a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. If you're able, please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. Your donation will go a long way in helping us continue to share the American voice. Thank you.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call into my intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or SITREP, the Drive Time SITREP. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
This is Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience. When I'm not debating with Donna Fiducia about politics, I listen to Cowboy Logic Radio. Why, you ask? Because outside of my blog, founderscode.com, and my own radio show, the Denise Simon Experience, Cowboy Logic is by far the most entertaining and informative radio show on planet Earth. Plus, Don makes me feel guilty if I don't listen to his radio show every week.
You're listening to your local news source, WLBB, News Talk 1330 and FM 106.3.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia, and WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. We're talking Russia with Joel Harding, whose website is toinformistoinfluence.com. And he is an advisor and consultant on information warfare and cyber operations. And we were talking before we went to the break about the acoustic weapon thing that was happening in Cuba to our diplomats. And I think we've gotten to the bottom of that, but nobody's talking personally. But let's move on, because Joel, I see country after country after country being exceptionally vulnerable to all things bad: socialism, Marxism, communism, and they're being hit with this stuff with some brute force in the propaganda world, but it's coming to them in many methods. It's coming to them in their own version of social media, with other communications, with advertising and education, you know, with internal policy and external policy. And obviously we saw that with Crimea and Ukraine, but I think the Baltics, Eastern Europe, and certainly Western Europe are getting bombarded as well. So a couple of different things have happened here. One is the State Department was awarded some money to counter this message. And then in the omnibus, there was even more money that was earmarked for promoting democracy in Europe. So we've got a track here that's got several off-ramps that we're trying to, and I think rightly so, that we're trying to counter some of these operations. But Joel, I've really got a question, because I don't know any better. You're the expert here.
Sure.
Who is doing the better job, or who's been assigned to this job that we think there's going to be any kind of effectiveness? I so worry about I guess it's got to be some people out of the State Department and even some of our other agencies that interact with other, foreign countries, whether it be commerce, whether it be EPA, whether it be education, whatever it is. I just really got to scratch my head. Help me here.
Sure. The truth of the matter is the State Department has something called the Global Engagement Center. And the Global Engagement Center was granted $40 million as part of the National Defense Authorization Act of actually 2016. And it's been delayed, and they finally got released $40 million of the $80 million that was awarded to them. And then you're talking about the omnibus. That was $250 million to promote democracy. So State Department gets all the say in the $40 million, and they should be getting $80 million, but let's not talk about that because I don't understand it. But the 250, everything is still up for grabs, and Secretary of State Tillerson resigned, so that puts all that in jeopardy. The seventh floor of the State Department, where all the leadership is in the State Department, most of the seniors were kicked out because they were Obama appointees, and they were considered very liberal and so not to be trusted. So they were all thrown out, but they were not replaced. And so the person that's associated in charge of this is the Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy, and the last one just left about a year ago. So there is nobody really in charge at State, and the person that is in charge of the Global Engagement Center is a guy named Daniel Kimmage, but he's actually the deputy, so he's acting. Now, the person that is in charge of the GEC, beside being in charge of the GEC, also has to interface with the Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications within the White House. And that person was Monica Crowley, and as many of us know, she was kicked out because she plagiarized on her thesis. So there's nobody doing that job. So the answer is nobody's in charge, but the GEC is still doing it. The only intact piece of the strategic communications machine that is in the United States government is the Broadcasting Board of Governors, which most of us know about, the Voice of America and Radio Free Europe. And we know that they're doing their job in Europe, and they're actually doing a good job. And the CEO is a guy named John Lansing, and he's doing a great job. And I've actually spoken with him face to face, and they have a plan, and they're going ahead. I have some misgivings about the results because he promised me that they were going to be doing something that's called methods of effectiveness, and I don't see the results coming through, and I'm waiting for that to come through. But that tells you how effectively that they are spending their money so that Congress doesn't just throw money at a sucking sinkhole and then it just goes down a drain. That we're trying to prove that what they are doing at VOA and RFE is actually effective. They are making this broadcast, and that results in more votes, less votes, more democracy, less democracy, and because nobody has ever actually done a study saying this is how we should affect the opinions of other countries, and in order to promote democracy. And we don't see actual ways of that being proven. So coming back to what you asked about, the $40 million, $250 million, in 2016, unofficially, the Global Engagement Center started asking for plans for strategy on how to counter foreign information warfare. And they asked me, and I submitted it to them. And then they asked me for another one, and I submitted it to them. And then about 4 months after that, they came out with a very sketchy, very first draft of a national strategy. And that kind of made me take a step back because the Global Engagement Center for the State Department and the State Department do not come up with national strategies on how to counter foreign information warfare. They just don't do that. That comes out of the White House, and that is a product for the National Security Council to come up with a national strategy. So, granted, what they were probably doing is writing one up on behalf of the National Security Council so that they give them something saying, here, take a look at this and use this as a basis. And that was probably what they were doing. But the funny thing is that I took a look at it, and the paper that I had submitted was a clone for a lot of what they gave to that was in that first strategy. So fast forward, now it's 2018, 2 years later, and they're asking for input on how to spend the $40 million that they got. Well, I've submitted a strategy to you guys 2 years ago. Why don't you just pick it up and use it? You had a national strategy. Why don't you submit it to the National Security Council and make it happen? And
Joel, hold on. Whoa.
Sure.
And sand in the gears.
Okay.
There was a time that CIA concocted these kinds of operations. Is state not talking to? Yeah, they did.
No. Well, no. Here's the difference. Okay. Everything that the Global Engagement Center and the U.S. government does has to be moral, ethical, and legal. Okay.
Yeah.
The CIA does not have those restrictions because of something called a presidential finding. They can break the law. They can do things that are unethical or immoral. And as long as it doesn't break into the news that it's a U.S. operation, they get away with it, okay? But what the State Department does has to be the truth, say, for instance.
Right.
They cannot broadcast propaganda. The Broadcasting Board of Governors cannot broadcast propaganda. It's got to be factually based. It's got to be fair and objective. And
fair enough. All right.
They can't make stuff up. The CIA.
What about USAID?
Well, USAID went away in 1999, but they said in 1961, Edgar R. Murrow was the director in 1961, and he testified to Congress that he said, the truth is the best propaganda, because there is no way to counter the truth with a lie, because people are going to know this is the truth and that's a lie. So they still have that. They still have that guidance. The State Department still, and the Broadcasting Board of Governors and the GEC, they all have the same lanes in the road that they have to be factually based, fair, and objective. And that's what journalists do. And that is a sign of good journalism when an editor can look at a piece of paper and say, that's BS. You need to rewrite that. Or that is too biased. You need to rewrite that.
Okay.
I actually interviewed every editor for the 7 bureaus within the Broadcasting Board of Governors, and they said if we were to broadcast propaganda, our listeners would know, and we would be called on the carpet, and we would lose our audience. So they're painfully aware that they cannot broadcast propaganda. And
propaganda can still be truth, though, right?
Well, it can be, but if it's not, one definition of propaganda says that anything that comes out of my opponent's mouth is propaganda, which basically is saying that it's a lie. Well, that in itself,
I see.
That in itself could be propaganda, because candidate X, all he does is lie. Well, by just saying that all he does is lie, that is a lie. So you're lying about candidate X lying all the time. And that's a simple argument saying that you can't say things like that. You can say this statement is a lie or this statement is fabricated, but you can't say everything that they say is a lie. But that's also not true. Now, one of the foremost experts in the world on propaganda is a woman named Dr. Emma Bryant out of the UK. I forget where she's teaching now. She's taught at Leeds, and now I think she's at Sheffield or something. I'll ask her. But anyhow, her definition of propaganda is completely different from that, and it's all factually based and objective. And I just can't remember it off the top of my head. But she and I have sat down and we've argued back and forth, and we have discussed. And because she says that the U.S. government is awash in propaganda. And I told her, I said, nothing that they're saying is propaganda, because they are bound by the same rules that Murrow was in 1961 is going to be fair and objective and truthful to the best that they can. Okay. Now, what you read out of Russia is not factually based, and a lot of times they just make stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at it, and your eyes roll, and you think, where in the hell, who was smoking dope and writing this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to wonder how did they come up with this really bizarre thing? And I've actually asked one of the chief propagandists, a guy named Dr. Igor Panarin, and I've actually said, do you believe the stuff that you're spewing? And he goes, yeah, it's all the truth. So to him, what they say is the truth because they say it's the truth. It's like, okay. But here, reporters such as yourself have to go back, and we have to not only verify the facts that we are using are correct, but we have to have corroboration and verification.
Yeah.
And that's journalism 101. But the Russians don't feel compelled to do that.
That job is harder than anything. It's getting harder by the hour. You read something, Fox says something, Reuters says something, Bloomberg says something, PBS says something, and you've got to go put all the pieces together. You can't report on something within seconds because you got to keep checking and checking and checking. And by the time it gets, said the 11th time, it's all distorted anyway. I mean, the job is so hard.
The new rule is if it seems to be too good to be true, it probably is, which is also an old rule. So right before the election, you and I were being saturated by emails, by things on Facebook, by postings and messages and all kinds of stuff that were just too good to be true. Now we know that they came from the troll factory in Russia, and we know that people were rebroadcasting because it echoed the opinion that they wanted to hear. And then they would rebroadcast, and so it would amplify the message. And I looked at it, and I said, oh, this is so bad. And so I would refuse to rebroadcast most of the stuff that came across my page. But at the same time, oh, man, I really want to say that. And so I found myself rebroadcasting a few things, and I go back and check on it, and I have to go back and delete my posting because I couldn't find any corroboration or verification from a reliable news source. So what I did was I checked CNN, I checked MSNBC, I checked Fox News, I checked all these things. I didn't care if they were biased or not, but these were professional journalists, and if they didn't broadcast that story, if they didn't pick it up, and I went through all the news engines in the world, and if they didn't print the same story as being truth and it being I had to rely on them. If they didn't say it was truthful, then I would delete it and not forward it. And part of my proposal to the State Department is that we have got to post information which we believe is truthful to the best of our knowledge. Exactly. And we need to provide sources that we believe are credible. I may not agree with the left-wing newspapers. I may not agree with right-wing websites. I might not agree with Joe, John, or Harry. And my politics might be that I'm voting for the next mayor of Mars. I don't care. We've got to learn to identify fake news. We have got to learn that news sources, reporters, and publishers can be biased, and we just have to be aware that some people make mistakes. So we just can't. It can't be a tripwire where we launch automatically when we hear something or see something. It's got to be actual human beings thinking about things intelligently, discussing them, and saying, "Okay, I think I see something that verifies what we're seeing." And then and only then can we launch.
And even the way some of these, the way Reuters will write one thing and then you trot on over to CNN the way they write it, that they're necessarily saying the same thing, but they said it so completely differently that they don't even match. And so
Right.
come away and you go, I don't even know what I read.
As an intelligence officer, I back during the Iraq invasion, I was the intelligence officer that would brief the commanding general of the United States Army's Intelligence and Security Command every morning, and I learned very, very quickly. He said, "Don't put all your reliance on intelligence reports." And I found out that intelligence sources are just as unreliable as some news sources.
Mm-hmm.
And I find out that the person, even though he's looking right at what's happening, he may not interpret things correctly.
Yeah, exactly.
He might not know the big picture. He might not know
context.
What is actually happening, and they might not understand that this impacts this nation much more than that nation. And so after I would read the intelligence report, I would look in the news, and I would look at CNN, MSNBC, all the different news reports which existed back then. And sometimes I would pick up the phone and talk with the embassy in that country. And I would say, okay, this is what your intelligence report said, but what is really happening there? And more importantly, why? And so when I would give the commanding general
the video
his briefing each morning, right, when I would give the commanding general his briefing the next morning, he knew that I had investigated, and I would tell him, this is what the left is saying, this is what the right is saying, this is what the pro guys are saying, this is what the con guys are saying. And I would give him, okay, there's 5 different sets of eyes that are looking at this, and this is what each of the sets of eyes is saying, and this is what it appears to be. And he would say, okay, well done. So you have to look at these things as
every angle.
Person, exactly. There you go. Okay, I'll shut up now.
Well, let me ask you this question. Last year, and we're all supposed to kind of hate on James Clapper because Drudge is telling us to, but last year, a year before last, before he left as DNI, he actually recommended something, and it almost seems like it exists, but it doesn't exist, but it needs to exist, and that is, I think he called it the USIC, the U.S. Information Center, some place that was a repository of stuff that was coming from like a million different sources that could necessarily be picked off and go, this is wrong, this word should be here, that happened in 2012 and not this, you know what I'm saying? That video was, and it just didn't seem to get any traction, and I don't know if I'm a fan or not a fan of Clapper, it doesn't kind of matter, but I almost believe that there was something to his recommendation because you wouldn't have to, because, I mean, you were doing it, you were creating your own U.S. Information Center, your military information center by what you had to do. And things are still coming to us, but we just don't know what to pick off out of it, especially in Russia knows that. Right. Russia is exploiting that, and they're manifesting it to be much worse. What say you?
In 1999, we had something called the peace dividend because the Cold War ended in 1991. And there were a lot of things that were left over, and one of the victims was the U.S. Information Agency, which outside the United States was called the U.S. Information Service. And after that, there were at least 5 different efforts to recreate the U.S. Information Agency, or as you say, the U.S. Information Center. And looking at what we've gone through from 2014 until now, I agree with what you're saying. And we have floated the idea in so many different forms. But the problem is that the United States Department of State, and when I was at the Pentagon, I actually spoke with a person who was the liaison from the State Department to the Pentagon for information warfare and strategic communication. I talked to that person, and he was an ambassador rank, and became a good friend of mine. He's since retired. And I asked him who should do it, and he says, "Well, we don't need a new place because the Department of State can't handle it. Well, I'm here to tell you, they've had that responsibility since 1999, and they have since 1999, so it's close to 20 years now, and they have failed by every checklist. They failed at every level, and they cannot do it. And they've tried to do it, and they cannot do it. They have this GEC, which is supposed to do the job, and I'm telling you, unless they have a good job and they commit to it, it's not going to happen. And it's going to, if it was successful, though, it would spin off into the U.S. Information Center. That's what would happen to it eventually. Mm-hmm. Now, Michael Lumpkin, who was the head of the GEC, actually had a really good idea. And he said what we need to do is the next head of the GEC needs to be at the DNI level, which means the person has to be almost equivalent to a cabinet member, and that they have responsibility of saying, state, this is what I want from you. BBG, this is what I want from you. GEC, this is what I want from you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they have all different directorial processes. They also have a budget, which is a line item with Congress, and so that is permanently funded, and they can expect to increase or decrease. And if they have the MOE as part of it, they're going to see increases because they're measuring how effectively they're doing it, and that's going to be the only part of government that actually does it. So it has to be a part of it. Now, the problem is that if you bring somebody in from academia to do it, they don't care if it's effective or not, okay? Yeah. If you bring in somebody from corporate America, all they care about is the bottom line. Right. If you bring in somebody from government, they don't care if it's effective or not, just as long as they get their next paycheck and as long as they get promoted to the next level. So we're going to have to find somebody, like me, that cares about the United States first, and they really don't give a damn about being paid. And in fact, you can pay me the same as a GS-15 when I'm on the same level as Clapper was. It's like that's the kind of person that we need in that position. It doesn't have to be me, but please, I do need a job, and I'll hire you to work with me.
Cool. Ladies and gentlemen, Joel Harding, please visit his website, toinformistoinfluence.com. Really kind of an important situation here because I don't know if today is our best day, but I don't think tomorrow is going to be any better when you got, the Global Engagement Center or the United States in Information Center or whatever it is that we have. All I can tell you is the information you're reading is wrong until something else proves it right. So just go on that premise. And ladies and gentlemen, we're very happy that you could be with us, and especially happy that Joel was with us as well. And Joel, you're going to come back because this is a never-ending topic. But thank you for that, for the time that you shared with us. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you again real soon.